Christmas. Up goes the tree, on go the lights. There really is no place like home for the holidays. An exciting season of presents and parties only a Scrooge could hate. But where did all the traditions start? Why do we hang stockings? When did we start singing Christmas carols and decorating trees? How did Santa get the red suit, the sleigh, and 8 tiny reindeer? There's a hidden history behind all of our modern customs. Some of the origins are dark and mystical. Some are simply about making money. So brace yourself for the truth behind the holiday we love. It's the real story of Christmas.
Well, it's beginning to look a lot like Christmas everywhere you go. Take a look at the 5 and 10, glistening once again, with candy canes and silver lanes aglow.
It's beginning to look a lot like Christmas. Temperatures drop, snowflakes fly, and cities and towns seem to start dressing up earlier and earlier. These days, the holiday party starts in most places just after Halloween. And that's because it's a big, big business nationwide. The spending for holiday decorations and gifts adds up to over $15 billion each year. There are Santas at every shopping mall from coast to coast, sleighs full of toys, and there are lights. Lots and lots of lights.
We like lights. As little kids, I think we all jumped in the family car and drove through different neighborhoods to see the lights.
Decra-Light Industries is one of the largest holiday decorating companies in the United States. Its designers and craftsmen create the splashiest of Christmas displays for public squares and shopping malls across the country.
We like big. You know, we like our deer big. We like our trees big.
The 500 miles of modern Christmas lights Decra uses each year are a lot more complex compared to the earliest holiday lights commercially available. When were the first electric Christmas lights invented? In 1882, by Edison Company Vice President Edward Johnson. Later, General Electric offered strings of 24 bulbs for $12, which is equal to $280 today. This bright idea is often credited to a New England telephone worker.
The real inspiration came from his job, where he worked for the telephone company, and it was, the little light bulbs in the early telephone switchboards. That gave him the idea for what we now know as Christmas lights.
Like the origin of electric Christmas lights, the backstory of many of our holiday traditions is part of the obscure but real story of Christmas. The reason behind the strange things we do each December. For instance, chopping down a tree and propping it up in our living rooms. Yet over 30 million of us will do it before December 25th. But why? It's a long story that lies nearly 2,000 years in the past, at an annual celebration practiced by the ancient peoples of Northern Europe. Every December, on the shortest day of the year, when the Earth was tilted furthest from the sun, came the winter solstice. It marked the darkest day of the year, but also the time when the promise of longer days gave cause to celebrate. To honor the occasion, ancient tribes held a 12-day festival they called Yule.
You have the crops brought in, you have the meat being slaughtered. You slaughter some of the farm animals because you can't feed them during the dark days of winter. So there's a lot of meat on hand. The beer has been made. It's perfect time for a feast.
The Norse burned a giant Yule log for all 12 days of the feast. And they brought evergreens, firs and holly into their homes. Over the centuries, the concept grew, and later it was co-opted into our modern Christmas tree custom. Today, picking out the family tree is a holiday tradition. And in any given year, American farmers are growing 350 million trees on 15,000 Christmas tree farms. That's roughly one tree for every man, woman, and child in the nation. Growers are constantly replanting. Years from now, today's seedling will become the decorative focal point at someone's Merry Christmas.
The biggest thing that I've heard from customers is, particularly with the balsam fir, when you open the door when you come home from work, you can smell that tree in the house. And that scent is what makes Christmas for them. That's the biggest thing for the Christmas trees.
It's not always easy to see how our modern customs connect with ancient traditions. What does any of this have to do with the birth of Jesus some 2,000 years ago? For Christians, that eventful moment is where the story of Christmas begins. How do we know what we know about the birth of Jesus?
We actually have two different sources from the New Testament for the Nativity. We have the Gospel of Matthew, and we have the Gospel of Luke. They don't refer to one another, they may not even have known about each other, and they tell us two different sets of things about what happened for Jesus' birth. And what we tend to do is we put these two stories together to get a kind of full picture that we call the Nativity.
Matthew's Gospel gives us the Star of Bethlehem and the wise men, called Magi, who bring gifts to the baby Jesus.
There's a kind of symbolic value to these gifts. What they're doing is they're bringing really, really precious goods to honor this child with a very humble birth. And there's a message there about how we need to recognize this birth isn't really humble at all, because this is a king being born.
This is the first example of Christmas gift-giving, but no one recorded when this actually happened. Nobody knows the true date of Jesus' birth, and early Christians didn't celebrate birthdays. So how did Jesus end up with a birthday on December 25th? Long before Jesus was born, the Romans celebrated many pagan holidays, particularly in December. And these end-of-year festivities set the stage for our modern Christmas holiday.
One Roman holiday was Saturnalia, which began on December 17th and was a series of parties that would last anywhere from 3 to 5 or maybe 7 days. You can think of it as sort of a big office party, but in togas.
Romans exchanged gifts at Saturnalia, just as we do at Christmas. Slaves were served a special feast by their masters and enjoyed freedoms that they lacked any other time of the year.
The second party is New Year's. It was a 5-day party, and it was quite enjoyable as well. And then in between Saturnalia and New Year's, there was already a birthday celebration for a Roman-related god on December 25th.
That god, Mithras, and still another god, Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, were both honored on December 25th. Since the date fell near the winter solstice, the same celestial event celebrated by the tribes of northern Europe, Romans lit ritual bonfires and candles to push back the darkness, the origin of our modern Christmas lights.
The winter solstice is the darkest day of the year. You know how dark it is when you get up. You know how dark it is before the end of the day. You can't wait for the sun to come back. Pagans all over the world celebrate that darkest day. And in Roman religions, it becomes central to the year.
After Christianity became Rome's official religion in the 4th century, leaders chose to absorb pagan traditions rather than outlaw them. This is when the church finally decided to honor Jesus' birth, choosing a date close to the winter solstice, December 25th. But as the church continued to absorb various ancient traditions, what emerged were two experiences of Christmas, one religious one less so.
In the churches, this holiday was celebrated with a pretty high degree of solemnity. People coming together, lighting candles. Christmas is being celebrated on Christmas Eve.
But outside the church, in private homes and in the town square, Christmas looked more like a big drunken block party. Ultimately, this rowdy secular Christmas would dominate the religious one, forcing later reformers to propose banning both Christmases altogether. Lights and decorations may be the essential trappings of our modern Christmas. But for kids, the only real necessity is a jolly, bearded old man in a red suit. More than 20 million children visit Santa every holiday season, including several thousand at Santa's Village, a Christmas theme park in New Hampshire. Where kids can also pet an honest-to-goodness reindeer.
The males get to be 350 to 400 pounds, and when kids walk into the barn, they just, they can't believe how big they are. And they feed them the crackers and the carrots and the apples, and it's just an amazing thing. These reindeer do fly, but only on Christmas Eve.
Ancient revelers would have a hard time recognizing our modern Christmas. But if you think of the holiday centuries ago as an idyllic season of peace, think again. Christmas was earthier, unrestrained, and fun.
Yeah, in the high Middle Ages, of 1400, 1500, you find Christmas really picking up. Kings are talking about this and how they have huge Christmas feasts. So you find gift-giving really popular. You find sort of the lights and Yule log traditions gaining in popularity.
But Christmas was also a solemn church day to be spent in prayer. And each of these Christmases, religious and secular, also had their own separate music, just like we have today.
You have hymns in the church. They're sacred music, and they're sung in Latin. And you find gradually the development in the 12th century of Christmas carols. And Christmas carols are sung in the vernacular. They're not in Latin. They're languages everybody knows. And people enjoy these songs, and people sing them together. And very quickly, there gets to be the tradition of not singing these songs in church.
But medieval caroling wasn't just about singing. It was about drinking. At every door, revelers begged for a gulp from the household punch bowl, getting drunker with every note they sang.
So what Christmas looks like doesn't look an awful lot like a sort of solemn, biblically oriented holiday. It looks like something else. It looks like it's always looked, frankly. It's this kind of festival of celebration and revelry.
By the 17th century, religious reformers were losing patience with the rowdier Christmas traditions. They decided the holiday was simply too much fun, and they decided to ban Christmas altogether. But how could Christmas be outlawed?
There's a kind of backlash against Christmas. Among Protestant groups, you find a desire to not celebrate Christmas, a repudiation of Christmas as kind of a Catholic invention, frankly, something that the Catholic Church had allowed happen.
In England, Christmas was even banned outright for a time. But that didn't last. Within a few years, a more restrained version of the holiday was back. But Christmas would have an equally hard time in the New World during the early 17th century. Pious settlers from England looked upon the holiday with suspicion. And when European settlers came to America, the newly formed Puritan colony of Massachusetts wanted no part of the holiday. And in 1659, it banned Christmas too.
The Puritans of New England were very well aware of the pagan associations with the celebrations of the winter solstice, and they wished to avoid any kind of association with that. One Puritan commentator said that Christmas was chastity's shipwreck. And another one in Boston said that men did more dishonor to Christ on the 12 days of Christmas than they did the entire 12 months of the year.
The colonies began to spread down the coast, and settlers in the mid-Atlantic region were much less conservative. By the mid-1700s, these colonists had adopted many of their Christmas traditions from Europe. But there were still a number of revelers who kept the rowdy behavior of the past alive.
In Virginia, for example, most people that celebrate it with a dinner with friends. And the colonial records and the early Republic records are full of instances where people in, a gentleman's home in Virginia, they're having a nice Christmas dinner when the local rowdies get word of it and pound on the door, and they go through this very ancient ritual of give us some food and drink or we're going to throw rocks through your windows. And so both those traditions are still there.
But as America matured, so did its Christmas customs, as the well-to-do launched a crusade against rowdy Christmas.
Respectable middle-class Americans wanted to take the rowdy Christmas, the public Christmas that took place outdoors, and move it indoors. I mean, these are people who had property. They were afraid of destruction. They were afraid of losing things that they own. So they want to take this public rowdy event and take it from the streets and bring it into the home and make the focus of Christmas around the family, around this private gathering that takes place in the house.
This effort was most deliberate and most successful in rapidly expanding New York City. Its founders, the Dutch, embraced their old-world homespun Christmas customs. And one New Yorker, a college professor with a gift for poetry, would change the face of Christmas forever. New York City, the Big Apple, the city that never sleeps, the birthplace of Christmas? It's true. New York City has shaped Christmas, the modern secular Christmas we now celebrate, more than any other city in the world. And it's really because of the efforts of two very gifted New Yorkers who lived here in the 1800s. They would reinvent old-world Christmas customs to create our modern American holiday. And they would help mold our image of jolly old St. Nick. The New York they knew was America's great metropolis, a city keeping pace with the Industrial Revolution that was transforming America virtually overnight.
New York in the 1800s was a city that was alive with change. The population was booming. There was new industry. There were the new stores that were growing up that provided the foundation for what became the commercialization of Christmas. But it was not only a city that was alive with change, it was also a city that was alive with new ideas.
Clement Clark Moore, a New York professor of Oriental and Greek literature, had an idea that would change Christmas forever. In 1822, he wrote a 56-line poem he called A Visit from St. Nicholas, better known today as The Night Before Christmas. Almost single-handedly, he created the modern American vision of Christmas.
What's really interesting about Moore's poem is it distilled various traditions in the early 19th century and put them all together and added Moore's own imaginings. Moore's poem becomes a path-breaking moment, a watershed in how Christmas is celebrated.
Moore's subject was Santa as we know him today. His inspiration? Two legendary Christmas figures of the old world. One was St. Nicholas, a 4th century bishop renowned for gift-giving, legendary for leaving presents in stockings. The other was Sinterklaas, the Dutch version of St. Nicholas. Sinterklaas had merged a bit with Odin, the pagan god of Yule, who flew through the sky on an 8-legged horse.
Before the mid-19th century, Santa Claus comes in different shapes and sizes. He arrives, on a boat, on a horse, on a sleigh, and all of that sort of codified and narrowed down in America, largely in New York City.
Both Old World legends were rich in details, many of which Moore chose to leave out. One omission was a bizarre, dark, devil-like companion of St. Nicholas, who might bring a switch to punish naughty children, or worse.
In Northern Europe, there was a sort of devil figure that accompanied St. Nicholas. He had horns, long red tongue, covered with fur, tail, and hoof, and he would come into the room right after St. Nicholas. And one scene in particular shows 2 little boys cowering because outside the door is this devil figure, Krampus.
But Clement Clarke Moore's St. Nick embodied only good. Moore introduced several new characteristics for Santa. He dressed him in American fur, gave him a pipe, and portrayed him not as a priest, but a jolly, dimpled elf with a twinkle in his eye. On his back, he toted a sack full of toys for the children of the house. Moore also gave him a sleigh that he flew through the sky, led not by a horse, but by 8 reindeer, each with its own name. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Donder and Blitzen. Moore's poem enthralled 19th century Americans. It created a new kind of Christmas, neither rowdy nor religious, but centered on home and family. In the decades that followed, artists would expand on Moore's imagery, but his would be the vision that would endure.
One interesting thing about the poem is that book editors actually changed the last line. In Moore's original version, it was, "Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night." Most books change happy to merry.
As iconic as Clement Clarke Moore's Santa was, he still wasn't the fully formed Kris Kringle we know today. His Santa still had no North Pole workshop, no elves, no letters from kids, and no naughty and nice list. Where did these details come from? Give the credit to another New Yorker, illustrator Thomas Nast. He took Moore's Santa and produced the definitive version for generations to come.
Thomas Nast is one of the great illustrators of the 19th century. A lot of the images that we see today, he created. When you think about the donkey and the elephant for the Democratic and Republican Party, he created it. The image of Uncle Sam that we've all come to know is a creation of Thomas Nast. And he also is the person who gave us our modern version of Santa Claus.
In 1862, one of America's major magazines, Harper's Weekly, commissioned Nast to draw its Christmas illustrations. He transformed Moore's jolly old elf into someone taller and grander.
So he becomes your grandfather. Gives him the full flowing white beard, which is the image of a wealthy person in the Victorian world. He was wearing a red coat with white trim, black boots, the buckled belt, the pipe.
Nast's image of Santa became indelible, and with every Christmas grew richer in its detail.
Nast does this year after year. He creates lots of the things we associate with Santa Claus. The list of naughty and nice, living at the North Pole, and that becomes the image of Santa Claus.
One reason Americans loved Nast's and Moore's Santa is that he celebrated childhood. Only recently had a new appreciation of children begun to sweep the nation in the wake of the Industrial Revolution.
You have to think back on how children were viewed at, say, the beginning of the 19th century when they were dressed like little adults and expected to behave like adults. Up through the middle of the century, things began to change, and everything became very home-oriented. And so children became very central to Victorian Edwardian society.
And by the mid-19th century, the Christmas tree, a variation of that ancient Norse custom of bringing in the greens, became the centerpiece to the family-oriented American Christmas. All because of one picture. On December 23, 1848, the Illustrated London News published an image of the young Queen Victoria and Prince Albert with their family assembled around a Christmas tree, part of Albert's German tradition. England fell in love with it immediately.
2 years later, this same image of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert was republished in a very popular American magazine with a couple of alterations. They took out Queen Victoria's crown and took off Prince Albert's mustache so that they looked a little bit more American, and it was a way of sort of essentially telling middle-class Americans who bought this magazine that this would be a tradition. This is a tradition worthy of your home.
The Christmas tree had officially arrived in America. By 1856, President Franklin Pierce was putting one in the White House. America's redefined, kid-friendly Santa Claus and elaborately decorated Christmas tree helped to transform Christmas itself. A holiday once ruled by drunken rowdiness was now a time to celebrate the family. For 79 million shoppers, the Christmas season begins the day after Thanksgiving, when the gun sounds on the retail free-for-all called Black Friday. We've all heard that Black Friday is the busiest shopping day of the year, but the truth is, that's a myth. The actual busiest shopping day varies, but usually falls closer to Christmas in mid-December.
That's why these malls decorate, why these shopping centers decorate. They're making a statement themselves. Besides being warm and friendly and inviting to the neighborhood, it's also time to start thinking about buying those presents.
But how did Christmas become so commercial? And why do we tolerate, even celebrate that? As early as the mid-19th century, Christmas had found a home in shops and stores that marketed the holiday to consumers. With specialty wrapping paper, Christmas cards, decorations, and especially toys.
This is the Industrial Revolution. The hallmark of that is creating lots and lots of cheap stuff and the creation of a middle class that has money and desires to buy this stuff. So it's not that hard to see that Santa Claus is going to be co-opted by retailers.
The first time a department store used Santa to sell goods came in the 1840s.
Santa appeared in a department store ad as an illustration of a sort of Dutch-looking Santa Claus going down the chimney. By 1874, from there, it just generated so many companies using Santa as their pitchman. A lot of bizarre images coming out of the fireplace selling coal, for example, or selling shoes, or everything in the world. He's been a salesman almost from the very beginning in America.
As time went on, Santa sold more than just products. He marketed Christmas itself and the warm nostalgia it conjured up. During 2 world wars, Santa reminded soldiers what they were fighting for and helped charities tell of those less fortunate. Santa sold the very idea of Christmas as a season of peace and goodwill toward men. And by 1940, Santa's expanding role as an advertising icon earned him a standardized look. Artist Norman Rockwell reinterpreted the red-suited, white-bearded gift giver that Thomas Nast established and brought him into the 20th century. Rockwell's magazine covers and greeting card images showed a big, friendly Santa, and others followed Rockwell's lead.
Department store Santas were starting to standardize Santa, and he was starting to be mostly red and white. It helped freeze that image, make him more jovial, more plush, more pleasing for a family image.
In 1939, while illustrators like Rockwell were improving Santa's look, copywriter Robert L. May was creating a whole new holiday icon. a red-nosed reindeer named Rudolph.
The Rudolph figure is created for Montgomery Ward Department Store in Chicago. And they want to have essentially kind of a handout, a Christmas favor, if you will. So he writes a 38-page pamphlet in verse about this woebegone reindeer. Originally calls him Rollo the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Towards the end there, they decide to need something a little more punch, so it becomes Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. And it's a huge hit.
In 1949, May's brother-in-law, songwriter Johnny Marks, put Rudolph to music.
He wrote the song and gave it to Gene Autry, and Gene Autry didn't like it. He didn't even want to record it. And Gene Autry's wife said, "No, this is a good song. You need to record it."
Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer had a very shiny nose, and if you ever saw it, you would even say it glows.
Autry finally agreed to record the song, but only as a B-side to one of his records. B-side or not, Rudolph became the biggest hit of Autry's career, sung by millions over the past 60 years. The story of this once shunned reindeer has gone down in history.
This is the perfect example of a person who wasn't popular, who, after getting derision from people, ends up being the hero. Isn't that what all of us want? No wonder this story resonated.
Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer has become one of the most popular songs of all time, but it's really a kid's song.
Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer, you'll go down in history.
Another holiday song from around the same time and destined for immortality was geared more for grown-ups. Written by Irving Berlin and sung by Bing Crosby, it's the biggest hit of them all, White Christmas.
White Christmas is a song written for a film in 1942 called Holiday Inn. It stars Bing Crosby, and it's kind of a race through all the great American holidays, and Christmas just being one of them.
I'm dreaming of a white Christmas, just like the ones I used to know.
So the song doesn't really catch on. It's the spring of 1942. We've just gone to war, but it catches on in the fall of 42, which is when America is really approaching its one-year mark of being at war. And these now hundreds of thousands, soon to be millions of GIs, are going to be spending their first Christmas away from home. And that's where that song has that real heartstring-pulling, nostalgic feel to it, that the record sales just skyrocket in October, November, December of 1942.
White Christmas is one of the most successful singles ever released, and it has been for more than 50 years. The homespun values at its heart, the values of Christmas, were what ex-GIs yearned for in post-war America. In 1946, they found those values in the reigning classic of all Christmas-themed movies, It's a Wonderful Life.
It's a Wonderful Life started life as a short story called The Greatest Gift by Philip Van Doren Stern, and it wound up in the hands of Frank Capra, who had just come back from World War II, where he had shot the Why We Fight series of propaganda films for the U.S. Army.
The Oscar-winning director, weary of war, crafted a sentimental masterpiece about George Bailey, a man who sees the world as it would be had he never been born.
It's a yin-yang film, you know. The yin is Bedford Falls.
That's for nothing.
The yang is Pottersville, and you see the other face of people and what they might have been.
Mother. Mother, what do you want?
Mother, this is George. I thought sure you'd remember me.
Years after its initial release, It's a Wonderful Life was rediscovered by younger generations on television. Aired over and over again each year, it eventually became one more treasured holiday custom, pointing out the comfort of ritual and tradition.
To my big brother George, the richest man in town.
The broadcast success of It's a Wonderful Life proved that Christmas and television were a powerful combination. In the 1960s, animators would craft specials destined to become a beloved tradition. One holiday special was expected to be a dismal failure, but instead became a classic. Christmas in America has evolved over the centuries, keeping pace with the rapidly changing nation itself. Yet even in our modern age, Christmas has remained a home-based family holiday full of nostalgia and childhood memories.
We can sort of re-embrace our childhood innocence before we became such hard-bitten, cynical, awful people, you know, that we saw the world in another way, in a more generous and kind and loving way, and that it's never too late to sort of go back to that way of looking at things.
Christmas's power to spread cheer and make memories skyrocketed with the ascent of an institution as dear to kids as Christmas itself: television. By the 1960s, baby boomers were enjoying a golden age of holiday TV.
There was a golden age of Christmas specials that began about in the mid-60s and went into the mid-70s. These specials were aimed specifically at children, although were sophisticated enough to entertain the adults that were in the room.
The very first of these animated holiday specials debuted in 1962, Mr. Magoo's Christmas Carol, a retelling of Charles Dickens' beloved story.
If you really think about it clinically, it's kind of a strange combination, putting Mr. Magoo in A Christmas Carol. Here's this comic character, and he's playing this dramatic role in classic literature.
Christmas! Ha! Bah, humbug! Merry Christmas! Out upon Merry Christmas! If I could work my will, every fool who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. Bah! Humbug!
It's probably one of the better versions of A Christmas Carol ever filmed.
After Mr. Magoo's Christmas Carol came a flurry of animated specials destined to be rerun every Christmas for decades to come. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, Frosty the Snowman, Santa Claus is Coming to Town.
Let me have just a little magic.
And Dr. Seuss's How the Grinch Stole Christmas. But in 1965, one special featuring a little round-headed kid seeking the true meaning of Christmas topped them all.
In 1965, we got a call from the McCann Erickson advertising agency who represented Coca-Cola. They said, have you and Mr. Schultz ever thought of doing a Charlie Brown Christmas show? And I lied and said, absolutely. So I called Sparky, our nickname for Mr. Schultz, and said, I think I just sold a Charlie Brown Christmas. And he said, what's that? And I said, it's something you're going to write tomorrow.
Mendelssohn and animator Bill Melendez had to create a 30-minute animated special in just 6 months. They made radical creative choices, like using child actors for the voices.
I was 9 years old. They were 8 years old, 7 years old. We're all in one recording studio, bouncing off the walls, playing with the drums and stuff, because it was a recording studio where, like, the Doors recorded their albums.
The work progressed, but time was running out.
We did end up finishing it just like a week before it went on the air. Then we took it to CBS, and the three fellas there didn't like it at all. And they said, we're going to have to run it because it's scheduled for 4 days from now. But, you know, nice try, but it just doesn't work. So as we went through these minefields, it's amazing it ever even got on the air.
One issue that concerned everyone was Schultz's insistence that the show quote the Bible.
One of us said, you know, do you really think we can, you know, animate a kid reading from the Bible? Do you think we can get this through? And I remember he said at the time, well, if we don't do it, who will?
Isn't there anyone who knows what Christmas is all about?
Sure, Charlie Brown. I can tell you what Christmas is all about.
And there were in the same country shepherds, abiding in the field, keeping watch over their flock by night. And lo, the angel of the Lord came upon them.
Bill staged it in a very, very simple format. And the way that wonderful actor, Chris Shea, read it, it became, you know, one of the really indelible moments, probably in animated history.
For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, which is Christ the Lord.
The success of A Charlie Brown Christmas proved once again how the secular and the religious Christmas aren't mutually exclusive, that each gives this holiday its wonder.
That's what Christmas is all about, Charlie Brown.
In the half-century or so since Linus uttered those memorable words, Christmas has continued to adjust to the changing times. In 1968, the crew of Apollo 8 took Christmas into space as man orbited the moon for the first time on Christmas Eve.
We close with good night, good luck, a Merry Christmas, and God bless all of you on the good earth.
More recently, Christmas has been revolutionized by the internet, where one-click shopping on sites like Amazon has added a new term to the Christmas lexicon. Cyber Monday has joined Black Friday as a retail milestone.
It's really remarkable, but in the last 20 years, there's been a revolution in the way we shop for Christmas. I mean, 20 years ago, you have to go out to your suburban shopping mall or go to a big department store. It took a lot of time, and now you just sit at your desk in front of your computer and hit a couple keys, and it's done. It's faster, it's more efficient, but, you know, it doesn't have the same feeling.
Such are the latest wrinkles in a very old story. The many ways we celebrate this ancient holiday.
Every generation bemoans the current state of Christmas. It's always they're wanting to go back to what they think it was. And that's the funny thing about all traditions and all holidays, is that they never are static. And they're never nearly as old as you think they are, these traditions that you hold near and dear.
These days, the glow from our holiday lights and television sets helps us banish the cold, dark winter nights, the way Yule logs and bonfires once did 1,000 years ago.
People make up holidays. Traditions are invented, but there are uses for those cultural tropes that stay with us for centuries. There's something about the deeper meaning there that is singing to our bones, and we hear it and we think, yes, that's the tradition, and that's what I want to celebrate.
For as long as we can remember, we bring in our greens and light our candles. We hang our stockings and sing our carols. In church and in the streets. Amidst the chaos, we even find time to rejoice at the birth of a child 2,000 years ago. Merry Christmas to all, and to all, a good night.